It was the stillness of early morning, the kind of quiet that felt wrong. A body, lying alone in a lonely place in southern Patagonia, two deadly bullet wounds to the chest of a 19-year-old girl. No killer in sight, yet two men behind bars. And then something even stranger happened. Today we're diving deep into the eerie, bewildering, and ultimately shocking true story of the murder of Johanna Cassis. And at the end, we are discussing the psychological breakdown, investigation, and legal mistakes. And lastly, the lesson learned about the case that leaves the question lingering. Who really pulled the trigger? Before the headlines, before the protests, and before the courtroom chaos. There was just a girl called Johanna Casas, a 19-year-old fashion model from Pico Truncado in Santa Cruz Province, Argentina, a place where everyone knows your name, knows your family background. But there she was, shot dead in August 2010, just days before her 20th birthday. Her body was found in a barren place outside town, with two gunshot wounds to the chest at close range, the bullet passing her heart and her ribs. The exact circumstances surrounding her death is who shot her, why, and how Johanna wasn't famous. She wasn't powerful. She didn't live a dangerous life. Johanna was a young woman with dreams that felt painfully ordinary, and that's exactly why this story hurts. Johanna modeled occasionally just enough to feel seen and feel hopeful. She had friends, and she lived the kind of life that feels safe until suddenly it isn't. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of this case. Nothing about Johanna's life suggested she was in danger. No dark alleys or no criminal ties, which means whatever happened to her didn't come from the shadows. It came from someone she already knew. Johanna wasn't alone in the world. She had an identical twin sister called Edith Cassis. Same face, same voice, and same childhood. Twins don't just share DNA, they share memories, identity, and a bond so deep that losing one can feel like losing yourself. So when Johanna was found dead, it wasn't just a murder, it was a psychological fracture. The time of death was early morning, too ordinary, and no witnesses stepped forward. No weapon immediately recovered, just a body, a silence, and a town frozen in disbelief. In places like Pico Truncado, murders don't disappear quietly. They echo and pressure mounted fast, and the town wanted answers. The police needed a suspect, and their focus turned to one man, Victor Cingolani, Johanna's ex-boyfriend, who at one time they were dating, was so aggressive and hot-tempered. He was arrested, tried, and convicted. To many, the case was closed, but this is where the story takes a turn that no one could have predicted. Edith Casas didn't believe Victor killed her sister, not only that she was already dating Victor and was in love with him, the man who was convicted of murdering her identical twin, and she planned to marry him. While the world saw a convicted murderer, Edith Casas saw something else entirely, and she visited him often and wrote to him letters. And slowly, against all logic and against public outrage, she became convinced that the man sitting in prison did not kill her sister. For Edith, this wasn't denial, it was a certainty. She believed the justice system had made a catastrophic mistake. When news broke that Edith planned to marry Victor Cingolani inside prison walls, the reaction was explosive, and protesters gathered and stones were thrown. Eggs splattered across police shields. To the public, this wasn't love. It was betrayal. A twin choosing the man who, according to the court, had ended her sister's life. But while the public focused on the wedding, something else was happening quietly in the background. The case was being questioned, and inconsistencies began to surface. As the case was re-examined, evidence began pointing in a direction investigators had once ignored, and witness statements that didn't line up, and timelines that shifted, and then another name resurfaced. His name was Marcos Diaz, who was later arrested because Marcos was the current partner of Johanna, who was in a relationship with her up till the day she was killed. And he was also a neighbor too, and he was known to be violent and possessive. 2. He was someone who knew her routines and was highly jealous and controlling towards Johanna, not letting her go out by herself. Someone who could get close without raising suspicion. At one point, two different men were imprisoned for the same murder. One truth is still unclear: who fired the shot in the killing of Johanna. Eventually, the courts reversed course. Victor Cingolani's conviction was overturned after some years in prison, and Marcos was also free after being in jail for some time due to insufficient evidence against him, even though he was the last person to be seen with Johanna. The system admitted quietly that it may have been wrong, and for Johanna Casas, justice didn't come swiftly. It got tangled and conflicted. Her name became associated not just with a murder, but with one of the most disturbing love stories in modern true crime. So the question still lingers: who killed Johanna Casas? And what was the reason for Johanna Casas' death? Was it an obsession, jealousy, a moment of rage? Or was the real crime something even darker that wasn't known, and the system was so desperate for answers that it chose the wrong one? In the end, one young woman lost her life. Two men lost years of their life, and a twin lost half of her identity forever. Some cases end with clarity, but this one ends with an eerie twist and silence. So let's dive into the psychological breakdown of the case, which is simply grief and attachment, because Johanna was young and socially connected in her community. Psychologically, victims like Johanna are often perceived as safe. Their lives don't fit the public's mental model of someone at risk. That perception fuels shock and denial when violence occurs to that kind of person. Identical twins often experience psychological overlap when one twin dies. The survivor may experience identity collapse, survivor guilt, and attachment displacement. Edith's relationship with Victor Cingolani can be understood through trauma bonding. The man linked to Johanna becomes the last emotional bridge to her sister, and believing he is innocent protects Edith from accepting a more chaotic truth. Love becomes a coping mechanism, not a rational choice. This does not mean her belief was correct or incorrect, only that it was psychologically coherent given the trauma. So let's also dive into the investigation and legal mistakes on how the case drifted toward the wrong conclusion. First, the early tunnel vision. Because once Victor Cingolani was identified as the primary suspect, alternative hypotheses were deprioritized. This is classic confirmation that the evidence that fit the theory was emphasized, and the evidence that contradicted the case was minimized and ignored. Secondly, the relationship bias. Romantic partners are statistically common suspects, but relying on probability instead of proof is dangerous. Emotional history was treated as motive, and lack of forensic certainty was overlooked. Thirdly, the incomplete evaluation of other suspects. Marcos Diaz was known to have a connection to Johanna, but was not thoroughly pursued early. Delayed scrutiny allowed evidence to degrade, and witness memories faded. And the core legal mistakes are over-reliance on circumstantial evidence without corroborating forensic proof, and insufficient exclusion of alternative suspects. And lastly, weak evidentiary chain-linking weapon, motive, and opportunity. What this case ultimately represents is about how humans, police, courts, families, and communities respond to uncertainty. Some crimes end with answers, but this one ends with a warning, so the lessons learned in this case are that investigators' hypotheses must remain flexible, and focus should follow based on the evidence and not just emotional narratives. For the legal justice system, wrongful convictions don't require malice, just momentum, because this case illustrates how legal truth can diverge from factual truth. For the public, grief does not follow logic, and loving someone accused of violence does not automatically invalidate belief, because moral certainty can be comforting but dangerous. So if you have your own thoughts about this case, do feel free to comment, because we are all families in this channel. But still, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment.